So this is such an important clip. Douglas Murray was recently interviewed on the Times Radio in the UK, and they were trying to push this narrative that, yes, Hamas are bad. Okay, thanks for acknowledging the obvious. But they say they're just a new iteration, mutation of an otherwise legitimate Palestinian cause. They say, look, in fact, it used to be a secular nationalist cause, and it's only kind of recently changed into this religious jihadist organization. But at its core, it is a legitimate nationalist, secular in many ways, movement. Douglas Murray destroys this argument, particularly where they're trying to say how Arafat was not a religious jihadist ideologue. Have a watch of this important clip where Douglas sets the record straight.
Hamas is an Islamist organisation, but its precursors in the Palestinian, in terrorism or militancy or independence, whatever we wish to call it, depending on one's view, was secular. Yasser Arafat's, PLO were secular. And I wonder if we define this fight as merely one against Islamism, whether there's a danger that we're assuming it has similarities with the fight in the West against Islamist terror that simply aren't there.
No, I explain in close detail in the book, as you know, what I think the similarities are. I think it's too generous of you to the late Yasser Arafat to describe him as a secularist.
Well, he thought he was secular.
Not much. He founded his organization once more, the PLO, in 1964, when they were fighting for the liberation of the occupied territories, as you know, but listeners may not. In 1964, Israel was not in Gaza, the Golan, and most of the West Bank, and so on. So what Yasser Arafat meant, and his colleagues in the PLO meant, was the liberation of everything that is Israel.
Yes.
The annihilation of the state of Israel. That was always their aim.
Yes.
And that has been the aim of all their successor organizations ever since. And it doesn't matter really on that level whether it's Fatah, PLO, or Hamas. As for the sort of...
This is such a critical point. Now, some of you may be thinking, Ollie, what's the big deal? Why does it matter so much whether they're religious or secular? I'll tell you why it matters, because what this presenter is trying to push across, the narrative, whether he realizes it or not, I don't know, but what he's pushing across is this narrative that ultimately what they want is just a political issue. It's just about land that they were robbed of, and they're just seeking to liberate themselves. The problem with saying that it's religious, which is the truth of the matter, is that it no longer becomes about a legitimate grievance of land that's taken from them, and instead it becomes about wanting to just get rid of the Jewish state as a religious principle, the same way jihadists want to destroy the West, which of course he would not see as legitimate. That's why it's critical. All of this comes down to whether you see the Palestinian cause as a legitimate grievance, which they've so desperately tried to convince the world of successfully through their PR, or you understand it as a jihadist ideological hatred of the Jews, of the West, of Israel. And that's what it's based on. The proof that it is that is not just history, not just studying the conflict, not just understanding that in the War of 1948, the surrounding Arab armies called it a jihad. They called it a holy war against the Jewish state. And when they described the catastrophe of 48, the Nakba as they called it, it was not about the displacement of the Arabs that took place because the Arabs decided to wage war against the Jewish state. By the way, people often think it's like the colonizing Jews came to the land, kicked everyone out, and then they waged war. No. There were Jews and Arabs living there peacefully. The UN said, right, the British have left, let's divide this land into a Jewish state, which does have precedence 2,000 years ago, and an Arab state because there's lots of Arabs living there. The Jews accepted, the Arabs rejected, went to war, and many of them were displaced because they fled, basically, as Israel was fighting back. But the key thing is that they were launching a holy war, and the Nakba described the catastrophe of not being able to destroy Israel. That's what the Nakba really meant. And so the key point that Douglas is making is he's saying, look, in 1964, when Arafat forms the PLO, Israel was not occupying Gaza or Judea and Samaria, the West Bank as it's termed. Jordan and Egypt were. And even then, they're talking about wanting to liberate, quote unquote, Israel and free Palestine, showing that they're not interested in just some kind of self-determination for their people. They want Israel gone. And the proof that it's not about a secular nationalist movement, forget their words of whether they say they're religious or secular, look at the fact that where was the big protest in Gaza to liberate themselves from Egyptian control from 48 to 67 and to create a Palestinian state there? We didn't see that en masse. The focus has always been Israel. There were no settlements in Judea and Samaria from 48 to 67. And yet still then they want to destroy Israel. The fact is that if all the Jews in Israel converted to Islam, God forbid, then they would lay down their arms. Because for them it is religious. It's ideological. It's not about a genuine national cause. The only one that has a genuine national cause that's valid in the land is the Jewish people, restoring sovereignty in their ancient homeland. The Palestinian cause is a self-confessed lie, a cynical ploy to try to get rid of the Jewish people's sovereignty, security, and rightful place. Just to expand on this further, the idea that Palestinian terror groups were purely secular is misleading. Even if when you look at groups like the PLO or Fatah, which may have appeared secular or nationalist, their ideologies were still deeply informed by Islamic concepts and imagery. For example, there was Islamic framing from the start. Even the so-called secular leaders, like Yasser Arafat, regularly invoked Islamic themes. Arafat referred to jihad in his speeches, and he framed the conflict as a holy struggle for liberated Muslim land. The PLO Charter and Fatah documents reference Palestine as an Arab land with deep Islamic significance, framing Israel's presence as a desecration of Muslim land. And even secular groups glorified suicide bombers as shaheeds, promising them Islamic rewards, blurring any distinction between secular nationalism and religious motivations. And groups like Fatah gave rise or cooperated with overtly Islamic groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad, showing clear ideological overlap and mutual justification. So it is really important to get this particular point clear, because otherwise what happens is you risk fundamentally misunderstanding the conflict. If you don't understand that this is primarily a religious conflict and not a one that's about two competing nationalisms, you'll never get to grips with the conflict, and you'll never have the confidence to articulate clearly the morality of it.
Thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.